Mckenzie soon became a household name in New Zealand. Every town of any size had a McKenzie store, usually right across the street from their great competitor, Woolworths. Every store was an Aladdin's cave of low-cost merchandise, the air filled with the aroma of soaps, perfumes and powders. When May McKenzie produced two sons, Don and Roy, JR had another bright marketing idea. He combined their names to brand the company's flagship line of underwear, Royden. For generations of Kiwi kids, Roy and Don McKenzie became, literally, the name on everyone's bottom. Even through the gloom of the 1930s depression, McKenzie stores were always bright and bustling. JR ran the business in a firm, hands-on manner. He had an astute eye for a bargain and didn't tolerate fools gladly, but he took a genuine and generous interest in his staff. A job at McKenzie's was a job for life, and his employees were proud to be a part of it. When the 25th Jubilee was celebrated with a grand ball in 1935, every staff member in the country signed an ornate letter of thanks to their boss and benefactor, J.R. McKenzie. They wrote effusively.
The happy and contented staff are a tribute to the personal interest you have shown at all times in the welfare of your employees, and the staff deeply appreciate the many generosities you have shown and the interest you have taken in the varied social and sporting activities. Yours respectfully, the staff.
His McKenzie empire made JR a wealthy man, but he saw how many New Zealanders had to struggle, especially through the Depression years, at a time of minimal help from the state. So he put his money to work for others, setting up a youth education fund in 1938. By 1940, war had erupted in Europe. New Zealand prepared to follow the mother country into battle, but still had time to celebrate 100 years as a loyal member of the empire. While the nation's centenary celebrations went on, J.R. McKenzie made a big decision. He put £100,000 of his own money into a new charitable trust and announced that every year, 1/3 of McKenzie's annual profits would go into it as well. The main objects of the new trust were to help disabled servicemen, the Plunkett Society, and, in the quaint language of the time, delicate, ill, ailing, or backward children. 65 years later, the language is different, but the objects are the same.
The aim of the Trust is to improve the quality of life of New Zealanders who have special needs or who have disadvantages. We do that mainly by making grants to charitable organisations that provide services for those people.
Well, Rangatira is an investment company. It was originally set up by J.R. McKenzie to manage the assets of the Trust. It's been operating since about the 1930s, and at the moment we have $100 million in round figures of funds to invest.
J.R. McKenzie set up Rangatira Limited, the investment company, as well as the Trust. Rangatira makes the money and we spend it.
Rangatira was named after the founder, J.R. McKenzie, who was known by his staff in those days, in the early days, as the chief or the Rangatira.
The amount that we're able to pass on now to the community is as great as at any time in the Trust's history.
By the end of the war, J.R. was 70 and ready to retire. He went back to the family estate in Canterbury, Royden Lodge, where he continued his lifelong interest in harness racing, importing and breeding many champion horses. Royden Lodge Stud, like Mackenzie's, became another famous name in New Zealand. The blood of champions pumped through the heart of Royden horses as they triumphed in Inter-Dominion championships, set records in America, and took no less than 4 Auckland Cups. Son Roy wore the McKenzie racing colours himself for 33 years, driving his last winner in 1987 with Argentina.
Argentina from over talent just. Judge will go for a photo. Tina gets the call after running second here on the first night. The horse is by Game Pride from Chellarima, owned by Mr. Roy McKenzie and driven by Roy McKenzie, pays $3.
The distinctive colours are still seen today. In 1949, J.R. became Sir John when he received a knighthood for services to philanthropy. A little later, he sat for a portrait by eminent artist Edward Halliday. He had earlier commissioned Halliday to do a portrait of Winston Churchill, whom J.R. greatly admired. That portrait hangs today in Parliament Buildings, Wellington. In 1955, May and John set sail on a trip to England. After falling ill on the way, J.R. McKenzie died in a London hospital. His trust lives on.